Okay, so just a few words. I'm not going to speak very loudly because it's the early hours of the morning here in the UK. But just a few words on the Pence-Kaine vice presidential debate, which I've just watched. We're switching between channels actually: CNN, Fox, the BBC, and Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera had a good format because they had some of the main comments just below. I'm not going to speak at great length here. But basically they're just analysing it on CNN and Fox. CNN, perhaps surprisingly, actually gives it to Pence marginally, and I would, on reflection, probably agree with that. But I do think it was very marginal. I think that they both had strong points. If I could use a Wild West analogy, I've actually watched The Magnificent Seven tonight. Great film, if you haven't seen it. Um, if I could use an analogy with that, deputies, deputy sheriffs. So I sort of see vice presidentials, VEEPs, as deputies. Um, Obviously, the whole point of vice presidential debates, and I think I'm correct in saying there's been a vice presidential debate every year of my lifetime, with the exception of 1996. Um, Generally, they are not as notable as presidential debates for obvious reasons, but they're still important because obviously, the position of vice president is literally a heartbeat away from the presidency. Lyndon Johnson called it a bucket of piss, but I think Johnson was underrating how important a position it actually is, because if something drastic does happen to the president, they automatically get the position. I believe third in line to the presidency is Secretary of State, and then Speaker of the House, and maybe the other way around. So, gauging who the vice president is important. I think it's fair to say that up until tonight, both of these guys were relatively not well known compared to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I don't know if it was CNN or another network, but they had this little pictograph of well known people, including Putin and former British Prime Minister David Cameron. And they asked New Yorkers who are the vice presidential candidates, and it was a woeful response. Incredibly small number of people could actually identify them. One person identified Joe Biden, but that was about it. So there doesn't seem to be a great deal of knowledge about who these guys are. Obviously, in Indiana, Pence would be known, and in Virginia, Kaine would be known. I'm going to just touch on a few points. Actually, Mike Pence is on the phone to someone right now. I'm not sure who. Show you the footage there from. They're just waiting to hear the results. Just in summary, the reason I think Pence had it is I think he was a little bit more in control, a little bit more. And I really do think it was very close. I think they both had strong moments. If I was to give it in percentage terms, I'd give Pence 51%, Kaine 49%. That's how close I believe it was. The only reason I give it to Pence is because I think Kaine, I'd agree with the CNN analysis, I think he was a little too eager to be on the attack. He came across as a little bit rude, and I think that resonates in a negative way. We look at what happened with the presidential debate. Trump kept interrupting Clinton, and Trump was generally seen to have lost that. I do think etiquette resonates with voters because it's possible to be strong and expose your opponent without being rude. Now, Kaine was a little bit on the rude side by constantly interrupting, and clearly he was trying to get under Pence's skin with the attacks on Trump, and it didn't quite work. On the other hand, Pence couldn't really defend the things that Trump had said, and these were all factual statements, and Pence tried to kind of get out of that. Kaine did have a good few sound bites. I found it quite funny when he said that Trump has his own Mount Rushmore of, I believe it was Putin, Kim Jong Il, Saddam Hussein, and Gaddafi. That was a good sound bite. Um, on foreign policy, Pence came across quite strong. One area where I think Kaine got the ground was on the issue of the police racial relations thing. And again, he kind of quoted what Trump said about we agree with community relations, but I felt he sort of dismissed the issue of police brutality, and it is a very real issue. He sort of, I feel, distorted what the Clinton campaign is talking about, and he kind of made out that the Clinton campaign is demonizing all police officers. I don't think that's what they're doing. What Kaine said was you can't ignore this issue. You can't just talk not talk about it. And frankly, I think that's what Pence was doing. He's basically saying, oh, we should respect the police, and that's it. Just because it's an uncomfortable topic doesn't mean you don't talk about it. So I think on that area, I think Kaine had the upper hand. On foreign policy, perhaps 50-50. What Kaine said about the Trump campaign, um, praising Putin, perhaps that was slightly taken out of proportion. Nevertheless, Trump's rhetoric does not help his case. And I think it is quite an interesting thing that many Republicans tonight probably would wish that Mike Pence was their candidate. Pence came across as balanced, level headed. He came across as a solid Republican. Well, he's a vice presidential candidate. But he came across as a solid Republican. Um, he looked like a politician. And this whole thing about this idea that, well, Trump isn't a seasoned politician like you and Hillary, I don't know why that's something to brag about. I think that's a weakness. This idea that being a politician is somehow a negative thing. In the end of the day, you want someone in the White House who knows what the hell they're talking about. And being a business person, and to how good an extent Trump is a good business person is a matter of debate. But even let's say, for the sake of argument, he's a great businessman. The point is, you need to know what you're talking about in policy. I don't think Trump does. And okay, perhaps I'm biased because I'm not a fan of Trump. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not explicitly a Clinton supporter either, by the way. But this idea that being a seasoned politician is somehow a bad thing, I think that's nonsense. Mike Pence should know that that is not a bad thing. Mike Pence is a seasoned politician. He's now the vice presidential nominee. Clearly, Trump has chosen him to balance things out. And I think probably after tonight, the Trump campaign will get a bit of a surge. But I don't think this will change the whole traction of the campaign. I think, if anything, it might help Pence in a run in 2020. He's only 57, so it's very plausible. He'd only be 61 at that time. So, yeah, certainly ideologically, I'd be more with Kaine. He's a bit more to my line of thinking on things. But yeah, I think tonight probably Pence had the edge, if for no other reason than etiquette does resonate with people, and I think Kaine was a little bit too keen to be on the attack. I think Pence kept it together, although there is going to be people saying, well, what Kaine said about the statements that Trump has made, um, it's factual, and Pence couldn't really defend that. I don't think Pence done a great job of defending Trump, except at one or two points about Russia. That was it. And I do think Trump's rhetoric is a huge problem. I think Trump has a lot of rhetoric, he's got very little substance. And that's my own biased opinion. But Pence's job is basically to make up for that. And he's done a good job tonight. So, on balance, I would say Pence probably had it tonight. But I'm not sure to what extent it's going to impact the campaign. These guys are both experienced politicians, both strong VP candidates, I would say. I wouldn't say that either of them is a disaster. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's my 50 cents on tonight's vice presidential debate. Thanks for watching.